Hi everyone, my name is Kelly Mack, and on behalf of my co-authors, Rai Su, Andrés Monroy-Hernández, Brian Smith, and Fannie Liu, I'd like to present our work towards inclusive avatars, disability representation in avatar platforms. This work was done during our time at Snap Inc. and Bitmoji. We use avatars in many digital spaces, from games to text messaging and social media. These little characters represent us in interactions with other people online. However, they aren't always inclusive of minoritized identities like disability. Platforms don't always support key elements of disability, like being able to be shown with a wheelchair. Others promote harmful stereotypes of disability, like in The Sims, a video game where avatars can select a personality trait called insanity, which can perpetuate negative mental health stigma. In fact, we still don't fully understand how people with disabilities want to represent themselves using avatars, nor do we have clear guidelines for making avatars more inclusive. In this work, we look at how disability identity can be represented in avatars. More specifically, we were guided by three main research questions, including when do people share disability identities or experiences using avatars? How do disabled people want to represent their identity in avatars? And why do people share disability identity or experiences using avatars? To do so, we conducted interviews with 18 people about their avatar use, how they represent their identities today, and how they would ideally like to represent their identities. We recruited first with the goal of finding a wide range of disabled experiences. However, we recognize that in doing this identity-focused work, understanding the experiences of people with other minoritized identities is critical. Therefore, we prioritized people who identified as genderqueer or queer and people of color as well. Consequently, our sample included a wide range of disabilities and consisted almost exclusively of people with at least one other minoritized identity in addition to disability. Notably, we had a high number of people who identified as being neurodivergent or chronically ill, as well as people who identified as being deaf or hard of hearing, having a mental illness, being mobility impaired, blind or low vision, or fat. Over half of our sample had multiple disabilities. Additionally, 3/5 of our sample was people of color, and 1/3 of our sample was women, and 1/3 was genderqueer. Moving on to the results. First, I want to dive into this research question of when people share disability identity or experiences using avatars. First and foremost, people talked about needing to feel safe in a space to share their identities that might attract hate from other users. P6 explained, "I don't have the bandwidth to deal with the pushback and toxicity that comes from online." Then, in spaces where people felt safe sharing their identities, platforms had to support people in crafting avatars that showed these identities. For example, one of our participants was a person who had albinism and also a person who's South Asian. Both of these identities often have visible indicators in a person's hair color and skin color. And this participant explains that she sometimes felt the tension of wanting to be able to show both identities, but not being sure the best way to do so. And oftentimes, which one she chose to use was based on what the platform supported. So for example, she explained, "I couldn't present well enough with avatars to look albino, so I just made myself brown. And then I got fond of presenting as South Asian, so that I intentionally started doing it more." Here I have images mirroring her Bitmoji and Animal Crossing avatars. She felt that she could get closer to matching her physical appearance in real life and therefore made an avatar with light blonde hair and pale skin in Bitmoji and purple eyes. In Animal Crossing, which had less options, she chose to present as a person with dark brown hair and brown skin with the same purple eyes. In this case, platform limitations encouraged her to embrace an identity that she didn't often get to present first and foremost in real life because of her pale skin and hair. Now I'd like to discuss how people wanted to represent their disabilities in avatars. One of the main ways was by showing the accessible technologies that people were using. P5 was expressing that it was frustrating that sometimes she couldn't show her service dog in avatars, even though it's a really core part of who she is. She explains, "When people think of me, they think of my wheelchair, my scooter, me, and my service dog, because she goes everywhere I go." However, when representing these technologies, we need to make sure that they are realistic in the ways that matter to the community and customizable. For example, one participant stated, "Whenever somebody is posed in a chair and it doesn't fit them, it just does not look right at all, and that's so distracting. It's like, what if an avatar had on clothes that were too short or too big? The same is true with assistive technologies. If the wheelchair or whatever mobility aid you're using doesn't fit and isn't consistent with your personality, it's very distracting. On the other hand, when allowing for customization, assistive technologies can offer another area to show intersectionality, like the image here of one of our participants' avatars that also shows his queer pride with a rainbow wheelchair. Then, many participants talked about wanting to show the full body of the avatar because there are some elements of disability that aren't visible from the neck up, which is what a lot of headshots of avatars look like. For example, our participants who identified as fat really wanted to be able to show all of the ways that their fat sits on their body and represent that part of themselves. Another person explained that one of their main adaptive technologies was compression socks, which isn't visible from the head up. Their chronic illness is invisible, so showing their compression garments was the main way they could show a bit of their disabilities in avatars' clothes and items. Finally, another way that people with more invisible disabilities like ADHD, autism, or mental or chronic conditions found that they could express pieces of themselves with other dimensions of the avatar, like what the avatar says. For example, rather than showing her avatar looking tired to show her symptoms, one participant wanted to connect to disability culture and have her avatar say, "No spoons left." She included this phrase in reference to Christine Miserandino's spoon theory, where people talk about energy and capability in terms of spoons, which is very common in chronic illness communities. Finally, I'd like to talk about why people showed their disabilities in their avatars. In one interesting case, several participants explained wanting to change how their disability looks in their avatar to convey their fluctuating abilities. As P10 explains, none of us are static. That's not my inner world experience all day, every day. If I actually want to be able to represent my disabilities, they aren't static either. Another participant explained that they wanted to represent their current abilities based on what mobility aid they were using and showing that in their avatar. This way, they could give their friends a sense of how they're doing that day based on what technology they were using. Here on the slide, I have pictures of the same avatar using a cane in one image and a wheelchair in the other. Another person brainstormed all of the different avatars that they would make and switch between easily if they could convey fluctuating abilities. I would have one version of my avatar for when I'm not verbal, one for when I have a migraine, and one for when I'm triggered and just need to withdraw. On this slide, I have an example of signifying energy levels with my avatar, where one image has a smiling person with a full battery and the other has an empty battery and the person looks exhausted. Moving on to the main takeaways that we learned from these results. Avatars in general were a useful tool for participants that could act as filters, morphing their appearances to include some identities while bringing others to the forefront. We highlight 3 features of avatars that are key in supporting people's desired identity presentations. First is their ability to be hyper-customizable. Being able to tweak all of the small details like the color of an assistive technology or the way that their hair is cut were important to participants in expressing different parts of themselves. Hyper-customizability also allowed people to show multiple of their identities at the same time. For example, a participant who had a rainbow-colored wheelchair to show their queer and disability identities. Second, avatars are relatively easy to update. While some kinds of changes might be impossible to switch between easily in real life, like dyeing and cutting one's hair or changing clothes rapidly, that's actually easy to do with the touch of a button on avatar platforms, especially if these platforms are built with the ability to save different looks and easily or automatically switch between them in different contexts. Finally, avatars support the ability to deviate from reality. We saw this in the example from P8, who sometimes chose to match her appearance in real life, where her albinism was the first thing people noticed, while other times avatars allowed her to pull other identities to the forefront, like the fact that she was a young South Asian woman. These 3 features allowed people to be flexible and expressive in their identity representation in avatars. In conclusion, through this research, we highlight the importance of disability representation in avatars, and we found how people with disabilities represent themselves using avatars today. More importantly, we learned how people with disabilities want to represent themselves using avatars. We encourage the community to refer to our publication for guidelines on how avatar platforms can be changed to better support the aspects of identity that we showed in today's talk. Thank you so much for your attention. We're happy to answer your question.